I came across some information from certain podcasters, certain people in the field of the Caitlin Clark department, connected the dots. And everything in this video, I will have to say, is alleged, but it is alarming. But it is not fact. It is alleged.
Something has snapped inside the Indiana Fever organization. And this time, it's not about a missed shot or a bad game plan. It's about power, control, and a father's legacy being tested by his own son.
Now, we know the Indiana Fever basketball team is owned by the Simon family. Now, we know Caitlin Clark, when they drafted Caitlin Clark, she was the biggest name in all of sports. She got drafted, boom, bow, Christy Size, y'all know the Olympic break, blah, 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 all this stuff happened. She got snubbed, big storyline. Now, what transpired in the second half of the season was that Christy Size came to the realization that she needed to run Caitlin's system and run through Caitlin. And guess what happened? They instantly started winning, and they made the playoffs for the first time in a mighty long time.
Reports are swirling that the owner's son, furious over how Stephanie White allegedly mistreated Caitlin Clark, has stepped in behind the scenes. Whispers of private meetings, silenced voices, and internal chaos are spreading fast across the league. What really happened inside the Fever locker room? And why is the owner's family suddenly turning against their own coach? Let's break it all down.
But make a long story short, Stephanie White came. Stephanie White came with an agenda. Stephanie White came with a plan. Now, I'm not making this a whole week of just attacking Stephanie. That's not what I'm trying to do. We know that Stephanie White came with this motion offense. It took the ball out of Caitlin Clark's hands, right?
When Caitlin Clark was drafted to the Indiana Fever, she wasn't just another rookie. She was a walking empire. Ticket sales exploded, jersey numbers shattered records, and the Fever went from being a forgotten franchise to the hottest topic in all of women's sports.
Caitlin Clark, when they drafted Caitlin Clark, she was the biggest name in all of sports. Coming out of Iowa, she was the hottest thing smoking. I said this yesterday, and I'll say this before. Caitlin Clark's trajectory was out of here. So, I mean, something like we never seen before. Her coming out of college, man. I've been here, I synced it. And it was just a remarkable feat just to see this young lady come from Iowa, do what she's able to do on a basketball court.
But behind that success, a quiet tension began brewing between Stephanie, White's coaching philosophy, and the expectations of the Simon family, the billionaires who own both the Fever and the Indiana Pacers. Sources close to the organization claim that Stephen Simon, the son of 90-year-old owner Herb Simon, was growing increasingly frustrated with how White was handling Clark. He reportedly believed the team's offense was suppressing Caitlin's natural style, that flashy, Logo 3 shooting flair that brought fans to their feet. Instead of letting Clark run the show, White installed a slow, methodical system that stripped away her creativity.
And ultimately, Caitlin Clark did get hurt, but what else happened? Ticket sales went down. Viewership went down. Caitlin Clark buzz went down because that Logo 3 Caitlin, we didn't have that Logo 3 Caitlin no more. Logo 3 Caitlin was gone.
Viewership started to dip. The buzz cooled off. And inside Pacers Entertainment, the mood turned sour. Stephen allegedly confronted key executives, demanding answers about why the team's brightest star looked restrained on the court. Those close to the situation describe him as protective, not just of Caitlin as a player, but of the business empire she represented. Every missed shot under White's rigid offense wasn't just a basketball issue. It was a branding problem. And that's where the internal conflict truly began.
Now, some of this stuff is not going to be in order, guys, but let's read this. It says, now after that meeting I just mentioned, Steve Simon called Kelly Christoph, Amber Cox, and Stephanie White into his office and let them know, not uncertain terms, that this was CC team from here on out.
White, known for her assertive leadership, wasn't about to bow down to outside interference. But Stephen Simon wasn't just outside interference. He was the future of the Simon family's empire. As tension grew, whispers spread through the organization that Clark's health and recovery updates were being mismanaged, even manipulated. To downplay her discomfort and maintain team control, something was clearly breaking inside. Indiana and the front office power struggle was only just beginning.
He stated, from what I understand and what I was told, when Stephanie White was told this, she hit the roof because she didn't like it. And Steve Simon told her, you don't have to like it, but it's that way. Now, this is, from my understanding, this is a conversation that happened at the conclusion of the season.
When Stephanie White took over the Fever, she came in with confidence and a plan. Her vision was about structure, discipline, and executing her signature motion offense. On paper, it sounded great, but on the court, fans quickly noticed something was off. Caitlin Clark wasn't the same explosive player from Iowa. The freedom that made her a generational scorer seemed to vanish overnight. Her shot attempts dropped, her body language changed, and the magic that once drew millions to their screens began to fade. Behind closed doors, insiders claimed White was determined to mold Clark into a system player, even if it meant stripping away the style that made her special. She wanted a team-first approach, not a Caitlin Clark show, but that decision reportedly rubbed the Simon family the wrong way. To them, Clark wasn't just a rookie, she was a gold mine. The Fever's ticket revenue, merchandise sales, and sponsorship deals were all tied to her name. Every time White benched Clark late in games or limited her role, those business numbers dipped. The tension became even more visible when reports surfaced that Clark was dealing with nagging injuries. Yet, according to some sources, White downplayed her condition, insisting she was fine to play. This only fueled speculation that Clark's health wasn't being prioritized and that White was protecting her coaching narrative over her star players' well-being. That's when Stephen Simon allegedly stepped in. Those close to him say he viewed White's approach as both reckless and damaging, not just to Clark, but to the entire Fever brand. Rumors of heated phone calls, private meetings, and urgent memos began to circulate among staff. It was no longer just a basketball disagreement, it was a battle over control, transparency, and reputation. And as Clark's performances declined, Stephen's patience began to run out fast. Stephen Simon wasn't the kind of man who sought the spotlight. For years, he quietly operated behind the scenes, handling the business side of Pacers entertainment, while his father, Herb Simon, remained the public face. But when reports of Caitlin Clark's discomfort and White's stubborn coaching began hitting social media, Stephen reportedly couldn't stay silent anymore. To him, this wasn't just a coaching issue, it was a direct threat to the organization's reputation and financial future. According to insiders, Stephen called an urgent internal meeting with senior executives Amber Cox and Kelly Krauskopf. The message was clear. The team's trajectory under White was unacceptable. He allegedly questioned why a player of Clark's caliber, the most marketable name in women's basketball, was being reduced to a role player. He demanded transparency about Clark's health and accused White of hiding key information from ownership to maintain control over team decisions. The room was said to be tense. White reportedly defended herself, claiming the team was protecting Clark by controlling her minutes and workload. But Stephen wasn't buying it. He believed the damage had already been done, not just to Caitlin's image, but to the entire Fever franchise. Fans were turning on the team, calling out the coaching staff online, and questioning why Clark looked frustrated in nearly every post-game interview. That meeting marked a shift in power. Inside the Fever's front office, for the first time, someone with the Simon name openly challenged White's authority. And when the son of a billionaire owner steps into basketball operations, people pay attention. After the meeting, whispers spread through the organization. Was Stephanie White on borrowed time? Was Stephen Simon preparing to make a coaching change before next season? Those questions began echoing across social media and sports talk shows, setting the stage for an even deeper confrontation within the Indiana Fever empire. After that confrontation, the atmosphere inside the Indiana Fever front office reportedly shifted overnight. Staffers described an uneasy calm, the kind that comes right before a storm. Then came the leaks. A string of anonymous posts began appearing on fan forums and small sports podcasts, hinting that a major argument had erupted between Stephen Simon and Stephanie White behind closed doors. Some claimed Stephen demanded that the team's future be built around Caitlin Clark, not against her. Others suggested he accused White of being disrespectful toward the young star and ignoring medical input about her recovery timeline. While none of this has been officially confirmed, the consistency of these claims across multiple podcasts, including Livewire Sports and Venom Reacts, fueled the rumor mill. What made the situation even more explosive was that certain details seemed too specific to be random gossip. People were naming names, quoting alleged lines from the meeting, and even pointing to timestamps from internal emails that supposedly backed up the timeline. Fans online began connecting dots. Why was Caitlin Clark's injury status changing so frequently? Why did her energy seem off after games? And why had White suddenly stopped mentioning her recovery progress in interviews? The more questions people asked, the quieter the Fever organization became. Stephen Simon, according to some insiders, wasn't just upset, he was embarrassed. The public narrative had shifted from Caitlin Clark saves the WNBA to Caitlin Clark is struggling under bad coaching, and in his eyes, that was unacceptable for a brand his family had spent decades building. The supposed breaking point came when Stephen allegedly told top executives that Stephanie White didn't have to like it, but she would run things my way. That statement, if true, marked the moment the owner's son officially crossed from observer to enforcer, and that decision would ripple through the entire Fever franchise. After that explosive meeting, things inside the Fever camp reportedly went dark. Media availability became more restricted, injury updates grew vague, and players were told to stay focused on basketball when pressed about Caitlin Clark's health. But for fans and insiders, it was obvious something wasn't adding up. Clark's body language said more than any press release. She looked drained, hesitant, and unusually distant from her teammates. It wasn't just about physical recovery anymore, it was about trust, control, and whether her voice was being silenced within her own team. According to multiple fan podcasts, Stephanie White allegedly tried to regain her footing by reshaping the public narrative. She emphasized team chemistry, downplayed Clark's minutes, and framed her cautious approach as protecting Caitlin. For the long run, but those words rang hollow for supporters who had watched Clark dominate at Iowa without ever needing to be protected. The numbers told their own story, viewership dropped. Ticket sales cooled, and even merchandise sales dipped once Clark's star power seemed restrained. Behind the scenes, Stephen Simon was said to be furious. He reportedly saw the spin as damage control, an attempt to hide the real problem. That the coaching staff had mishandled both Clark's recovery and her role. In business terms, he viewed it as brand sabotage. Every cautious press conference, every awkward timeout, and every restricted minute for Clark represented lost millions in momentum. The phrase, "the Clark effect," had once been the WNBA's greatest asset, a symbol of growth and excitement. But under Stephanie White's leadership, that effect was fading fast. Stephen allegedly made it clear that the Fever's direction had to change, even if that meant removing the person at the center of the controversy. By this point, the story had grown beyond basketball. It was about accountability and who really held the power inside the Indiana Fever organization. As whispers turned into headlines, the tension inside Pacers entertainment reached a boiling point. Executives who had once stood firmly behind Stephanie White began distancing themselves. Emails went unanswered, calls weren't returned, and meetings that once included White were suddenly being held without her. Something had changed, and everyone in the building felt it. Stephen Simon, according to insiders, was no longer just voicing frustration. He was taking action. Reports suggest he began quietly reshuffling internal responsibilities, giving more influence to figures who supported his stance on Caitlin Clark's treatment. That included marketing directors and business strategists who understood the gravity of Clark's fan base and her value to the franchise's long-term future. The message was clear. This wasn't just about basketball strategy anymore. It was about protecting an investment worth millions. Stephanie White, meanwhile, found herself increasingly isolated. Sources described her as stubborn but shaken. She believed she was being undermined by people who didn't understand the demands of coaching, and she wasn't afraid to let that frustration show in team meetings. Players reportedly noticed her tone shift, less collaborative, more defensive. Clark, ever the professional, remained quiet in public. But fans could see the tension in her post-game demeanor. Behind closed doors, several players began to question the leadership dynamics. Was White still in control? Was ownership losing confidence in her? Or was the team already preparing for a change before the next season even began? Meanwhile, Stephen Simon's frustration reportedly reached his father. For Herb Simon, who had built his empire on steady leadership and loyalty, the turmoil was embarrassing. The family name was being dragged into sports talk shows, and that kind of exposure wasn't good for business at this stage. The question was no longer if something would happen, it was when. The foundation of trust inside the Indiana Fever had cracked, and everyone was waiting to see who would fall first. The breaking point came quietly, not through a press conference or an official statement, but through silence. Stephanie White stopped appearing in certain media sessions, and her usual confident tone disappeared from interviews. Insiders said she looked drained, worn down by weeks of mounting tension. Meanwhile, Stephen Simon was said to be making calls directly to league contacts, bypassing normal channels. That kind of move was unprecedented, signaling that ownership had lost patience with how the team was being run. Around this time, fans began noticing strange inconsistencies. Caitlin Clark was seen practicing one day, then mysteriously sidelined the next. The explanations given by White and team officials never seemed to match. Some claimed it was load management. Others whispered that Clark herself had pushed to play through pain, only to be overruled. Those contradictions fueled even more speculation that something inside the Fever had fractured beyond repair. The locker room atmosphere reportedly became icy. Some players supported White, believing she was doing what was best for the team's development. Others quietly sided with Clark, frustrated that her star power was being contained instead of celebrated. The divide ran deep, and once word reached Stephen Simon that morale had cratered. It was the final straw. Sources say Stephen called for an internal review, demanding written reports from coaching staff and trainers about every medical decision made regarding Clark's recovery. The move stunned the organization. It wasn't just an investigation, it was a message. Someone was going to be held accountable within days. Reporters began catching wind of internal shakeups, and speculation ran wild. Was White about to be fired? Was Stephen pushing for new leadership altogether? No one knew for sure, but one thing was certain: the battle that began with coaching strategy had evolved into a full-blown power struggle that threatened to redefine the Indiana Fever's entire future. By the time the dust began to settle, the Indiana Fever were no longer just a basketball team. They were a headline factory. Every sports outlet was digging for answers, and every podcast was speculating on how deep the rift really ran. Inside the organization, people spoke in whispers. The once steady structure that Herb Simon built had turned chaotic, and the source of that chaos pointed squarely toward Stephanie White's handling of Caitlin Clark. Stephen Simon, now fully in command of the situation, reportedly confronted senior staff once more. He made it clear that the Simon family's name would not be tied to any narrative of player abuse or mishandled injuries. His tone, according to one insider, was described as controlled fury, a businessman's anger mixed with personal disappointment. For him, this wasn't just about defending a star athlete. It was about defending a family legacy built over decades. Meanwhile, Stephanie White's supporters tried to hold the line, insisting that the rumors were exaggerated. But with every passing day, more cracks appeared. Sponsors started asking questions. The WNBA front office was reportedly briefed about the internal investigation, and Clark's representatives were growing increasingly vocal behind the scenes. The tension had spilled far beyond Indiana. It was now national. Fans, once divided, began uniting under one common theme: Caitlin Clark deserved better. Hashtags like Free Caitlin and Let Her Play started trending again, echoing the frustration of supporters who believed her light had been dimmed by poor leadership. For the Simon family, this was unacceptable. Their billion-dollar reputation was being dragged through controversy, and Stephen had no choice but to act, whether through firing, restructuring, or forcing resignations. Change was coming. The message was unmistakable. The Fever were about to be rebuilt from the top down, and anyone who stood in the way of that, including Stephanie White, would be swept aside. The storm inside the Indiana Fever has become more than a basketball story. It's a battle for control, truth, and respect. What began as frustration over coaching has spiraled into a power struggle that could reshape the team's entire future, with Stephen Simon now stepping out of his father's shadow to defend both Caitlin Clark and the Simon legacy. One thing is clear: silence is no longer an option, whether Stephanie White stays or goes. The message has been sent. Caitlin Clark isn't just the face of the Fever, she's the foundation of its survival.